So our first session this afternoon is a panel on some of the strategies to promote hydrogen EV adoption in the Middle East. Leading our discussion, let's welcome our moderator, Cornelius Matthes, who is the CEO of DII Desert Energy and MENA Hydrogen Alliance. A very warm welcome. Lovely to have you here. And let's welcome our panel. We have Zhao, who is the Director of Hydrogen Fuel Cell and ePowerTrain Cummins. A very warm welcome. Do come on up, and please welcome Nasir Shamsi, the CEO of Beeah Transport at Beeah Group, is also with us. And we also have Robin Mills, the CEO of Qamar Energy, and rounding out our panel, please welcome Arvind, CJ, who is partner at Roland Berger. Let's give them a nice warm welcome. Cornelius, it's over to you.
Thank you very much. That was a wonderful welcome, and it's pity to still have, I think, a few people in a lunch, but a warm hello to everybody. It's great to see that on electric vehicles, on mobility, there is shows here. We've seen big momentum with COP28, and we are now implementing the UAE consensus. And the UAE actually has always been a great launchpad for technology, innovation, which is precisely the topic of the summit here. I've been personally based for a bit more than 10 years now, and saw solar growing from a bit of marketing to some of the largest solar parks in the world, like Mohammed bin Rashid Al Maktoum Solar Park in Dubai or Swayhan Al Dhafra in Abu Dhabi. So this is amazing that the UAE has shown such leadership. And again, on the hydrogen side, which is our topic today, so the UAE is still the first country in the entire Middle East, North Africa region with an official national hydrogen strategy, where we had the pleasure to contribute as well with the MENA Hydrogen Alliance. It was announced on 6th of November last year, so just half a year ago, just in time for COP28. And I find it particularly interesting because it's not only to produce best, let's say, low emission hydrogen, of course a mix, we are over the color discussion, but it's well beyond just the production. It includes midstream, downstreams, application. There is in fact even some sort of ambition to become a trading hub, a value added hub, because the beauty of hydrogen is that hydrogen connects all the sectors. Hydrogen is first of all the best friend of renewables. And hydrogen is, and also for our organization, starting 15 years ago in energy transition, mainly with solar, wind, electricity grids, hydrogen is providing the link to all primary energy. So linking the power sector with heating and cooling, transport, industrial applications. So I think that is what makes hydrogen so interesting, because it creates this kind of links, and sectors are merging, you know, electrons with molecules. So this just as a little bit of a preface to this discussion. We have a wonderful panel today on our hydrogen topic, on hydrogen mobility, and again to stress that the UAE hydrogen strategy has quite some elements, and you can of course download the strategy from the website of the Ministry of Energy and Infrastructure. It is quite an interesting read. It's quite a comprehensive document. So there is on the mobility side quite some emphasis, and all the things you need from production, midstream, downstream. So I'm quite confident that this will help to you know, to get some nice adoption here in the UAE, like the UAE has shown with electric vehicles, renewable energy, and many others. So, having said that, I would like to give the panelists the opportunity just to briefly introduce your organization and what you do, maybe starting with Alan. Welcome, Alan.
Great. Thanks, Cornelius. And thanks, everybody, for joining. Yeah, I'm Alan Zhao. I lead the zero emission technology side of the business for Cummins. Probably most people here in the room know Cummins by its diesel or natural gas engine and power generators. That is our core business today. and we're also having the energy transition, zero emission technology side of the business. So we're enable our customers continue to improve their emission with our core business. At the same time, also have ability to switch over to zero emission. So we have both set of product available today. So later on, we can talk a little bit more about how actually we see that transition happen and how the hydrogen and electrification come together, as well as how that blend into our daily life today, right? As we probably know today, if we switch over to be zero emission today, our life will probably not going to be the same tomorrow if we do that. So how do we actually see that transition? I think it's important. Hydrogen plays an important role in this transition. So let's get into that. Thanks.
Wonderful. Thank you, Alan. Nasir from Beeah, from Sharjah.
Yeah, thank you for having me, and thank you for this opportunity. I'm Nasir Al-Shamsi. I'm the CEO of Beeah Transport at Beeah Group. I oversee Beeah's fleet operations. We have more than 2,000 vehicles on our fleet, operating in 3 different countries. And since we're an environmental company, it's a mandate for us to shift away from the typical ICE vehicle towards a more eco-friendly vehicle. So, and it's part of my scope is to build a strategy to gradually decarbonize the fleet that we have, looking at different forms of, energy, electric vehicles, hydrogen vehicles, gas vehicles as well. Yeah, this is basically what I'm doing at Beeah.
Thank you, Nasir. Robin, welcome.
Yes, so thank you, Cornelius, and thank you, everybody. So, as Chief Executive at Qamar Energy, my responsibility is for delivering our energy consulting, and of course, a huge part of that today is around the energy transition and decarbonization. And so we've worked very extensively across the hydrogen sector through the whole MENA region, particularly the UAE and the GCC countries, but elsewhere as well. And I think one very interesting trend that we see is that what were previously separate markets, oil, gas, hydrogen, electricity, have become quite integrated markets and will become closer and closer, will become more substitutable, and sectors which looked separate, like the electricity and utility sector and the transport sector, also will become merged or will have to work together much more closely. And hydrogen is one of those key elements of allowing that transition and that substitution and flexibility. So it's a very key part of delivering a lot of the decarbonization work that we do. So decarbonizing not just transport, but all kinds of industrial sectors and other sectors which are using transportation vehicles at the moment, oil-fired vehicles, but possibly electric, possibly hydrogen, or other options as well.
Yeah, thank you. And Arvind from Roland Berger. Roland Berger, like Cummins, is an associate partner of DRI and the MENA Hydrogen Alliance. So glad to have you with us.
Thank you, Cornelius. Hi, everyone. I'm Arvind. I'm a partner with Roland Berger. I co-lead the automotive and mobility practice in the region. As a firm, we've been supporting, let's say, stakeholders across the value chain, again, more from an investor perspective, what do they need to do in Middle East and so on. And of course, there is always the question of, is it battery electric, is it fuel cell, when do we do the transition, where do we place our bets on? So that's, of course, some of the questions which we always come up with. And we also, let's say, focus a bit on how do you develop, let's say, a successful case for many of these fleet providers and so on. So more from a mobility and transportation perspective, we've been supporting, and happy to be a part of this panel.
Wonderful. Yeah, and mobility is quite an important topic because the traffic has really become a bit of a challenge. So I think that's another point, by the way, to mention. Let's start maybe with riffing a bit on what has successfully fueled the growth of EVs in the UAE. We have more than 40,000 EVs, and which is, I think, quite a remarkable result, particularly given the low prices for petrol here. Who would like to comment a bit on why this happened, why UAE has attracted successfully so many EVs, without any subsidies like countries like Norway did?
Yeah, I can take a shot at it. I think this is this environment here is always push for innovation, and to be there first. I think that spirit is pretty important to drive those kind of innovation and adoption of the new technology. That's one, right? So I think if you look at the hydrogen in the space here, locally, the government is doing the same thing. You really try to push for that. I think that, for me, that environment build and to be able to try to drive for the future is important. Environment to build. So that's the most important thing, I think.
Yeah, it's an important point. So the environment, the track record, the eagerness for innovation. Arvind, you wanted to add something?
Thanks, Cornelius. So in terms of, let's say, the EV adoption related part, so we every 6 months we do a survey with like around 1,000 respondents from UAE, KSA, Qatar, and so on. And the usual things in terms of challenges comes out as availability of charging infrastructure, the availability of vehicles at the right price points, and of course the range anxiety, which is of course linked to the first thing, which is around charging infrastructure. So if we look at what happened in the UAE is that there was a huge push with respect to charging infrastructure at the very beginning, right? So there were a few hundred chargers which were already launched a few years back. And that kind of built a bit of the confidence around, hey, look, I can indeed take my vehicle out and I can find a charging point. You go into any mall today, you do find the green chargers which are available, you have parking spots, and you're able to charge it quite quickly. So that bit of confidence build up pushed consumers to adopt the new technology. Again, and what we have seen is that from a regulation perspective as well, there weren't too many barriers in terms of getting vehicles certified and so on, which still exist in some of the countries for the, let's say, the vehicle manufacturers. They need to go through very long certification process to get their vehicle to be, let's say, certified for sale. That was not the case in UAE. All of these particular processes were, let's say, shortened, and they were able to launch it quite quickly. Once you see this positive movement, you see outside how many of the new Chinese brands are out there in terms of launching their next range of models. So it's this kind of, let's say, a kind of like a cyclic reaction which is happening, where we are seeing more and more of these vehicles getting into the market, and through that, people are able to kind of buy better products or at least try out new products and so on. I think that's the kind of, let's say, push which has been happening in this particular market, which again, we have not seen in some of the other neighboring markets yet. But again, once you have the regulatory aspects and the charging infrastructure being fixed, you will see more of the EV adoption happening in the region.
Yeah, you're making an important point. The charging infrastructure, I think UAE a few years back was third in the world by, I think, density, the number of chargers per capita. I think this is remarkable indeed. I'm personally always surprised that everybody seems to like electric vehicles. My Emirati friends love them, and like all across the bank. So it's this is, I think, also quite a good sign. Well, for hydrogen, let's say, passengers vehicles, we had this filling station, but that was quite a few years back in Festival City. It was a bit too early. I think the Air Liquide one, it closed down. And then there was a few years back the first green hydrogen project in the entire MENA region, a joint venture between DEVA and Siemens Energy. And yeah, I think just the right time for COP, the first hydrogen refueling station opened in Matthes City, and we had at our annual summit just before COP, we had cars, and everybody was so excited to drive the BMWs, the hydrogen fuel cells. They drive really nicely. They drive exactly like electric vehicles because they're not much different effectively. So, well, there's the first refueling station now, but how do you see this? Do you agree with the excitement? Do you see other fuel cell electric vehicles around, similar to the BMW ones I mentioned? Maybe some Toyota Mirais or Hyundai, I think, has a few ones. So how do you see this? Who would like to comment?
I think, from a future mobility standpoint, I mean, technology being future-proof, we really need to look at two elements over here. Adoption is one key element, but also we need to look at how economically feasible it is to own and operate such a vehicle. It drills down to, when you look at adoption, we just discussed, the infrastructure in place, whether it's, hydrogen or electric, it all goes back to the infrastructure. And this is one element. We look at also the charging time, whether it's an electric vehicle or you're charging your hydrogen vehicle as well. You should have some sort of a like-to-like experience. You go into a gas station, it takes you a couple of minutes, and then you're out. So this is the type of questions that needs to be addressed by private companies, governments, in order to have a mass adoption. It's really important, I believe, and I think many would agree, to have that mix of types of vehicles on the road. Now, I mean, we'll keep the eco vehicle aside right now, but also, petrol vehicles, the diesel vehicles as well, they're really becoming really efficient and very eco-friendly, having these standards in place, such as, Euro 5, Euro 6 in place. Having such standards also should apply on eco-friendly vehicles, hydrogen vehicles, electric vehicles. Where does the energy come from? Does it come from a fossil fuel generator, such as power plants, or it's coming from a renewable source, the solar panels and so on? This will also, provide an avenue of economic growth, having an option. So, I would definitely need, I don't want to be restricted to a type of a vehicle, say, you can only buy an electric vehicle, but what if I wanted a hydrogen vehicle? What if I want a hydrogen vehicle? I need to have that option when it comes to the mix of, eco-friendly vehicles.
Yeah, well, let's maybe stay with the charging infrastructure, because we identified this as a key enabler for the growth and the adoption of electric vehicles. Now we have the first one, but the big question is, well, hydrogen and fueling stations, they're pretty expensive. They cost more than $1 million, just one station. So the question, who would take over? This is more probably a thing for ADNOC, ENOC, maybe Diva. How do you see this? Who would take the lead?
So right now, I mean, the average, for example, the average price for 1 kg of hydrogen is in the range of 50 AED. That's in the UAE as of today. Now, for this to become economically viable for investors, such as DIWA, ADNOC, or even government entities, the price should stay between the range of 8 dirhams per kg, because that will give you an equivalent of running a gasoline vehicle, right? Mm-hmm. So that will automatically open doors for manufacturers such as Toyota, BMWs, Hyundai, to even bring more cars, because they can easily, sell the vehicles here and they will be operated. Because there is a sweet spot, right? In the economic scale, there's a sweet spot. If we manage to have that, let's say, 8 hours of utilization on a charging station, for example, whether both on hydrogen or electric, we can break even, let's say, in 2 to 3 years. But subject to the utilization, and that's subject to the number of vehicles on the ground. But that, if we don't reach that curve, it's just useless.
Yeah, well, if you look at, I'm from Germany originally, so we have more than 100 hydrogen refueling stations. You can drive anywhere easily without a big detour. Ellen, would you maybe like to comment? You have the US view. China, I think, is #1 globally with the number of refueling stations.
Yes.
So hydrogen mobility, not only for passenger cars, but for buses, trucks, is a reality today, right? Would you like to give us maybe a bit of an overview on how the reality looks like?
Yes, thanks. Yeah. So actually, this is interesting. Thanks for that. I think most of people know that from the EV and the hydrogen-powered trucks or buses or that perspective, China is really, really high up there, right? So from building infrastructure perspective, this is a kind of maybe different perspective. Maybe government took more important role in stimulating that, to really help drive that. I think if you look at from basic infrastructure build-out perspective, right? Normally government does quite a bit of that work for us, even for utility, electricity, all those. I think if we are enabling that, then technology is not an issue. For example, today, product is available for Cummins, we have hydrogen fuel cell driven buses, trucks, right, available to be deployed. We have buses and trucks, buses over 6 million miles running in China, trucks, city dumpers over 2 million kilometers. And so those solutions are available. So, and with this, actually, in China, cities are really building a lot of those infrastructures to enable those applications, those deployment. Buses can build those filling stations, or let's say not government build it, but incentivize, have the policy to build that. Once you have that, then product can be deployed, because then that's enabled. You can't have an asset on the road, for example, in mobility, and where you say, okay, I have no way to add it. So you can't deploy it. So infrastructure must go to enable it, right? Tandem. That will enable to Nasir's point also, once you have it, utilization will go up, even the infrastructure. That will reduce the delivered hydrogen cost. Today, delivered hydrogen cost is still high. But if there is enough infrastructure, there is enough deployment, then the utilization goes up, the delivery cost will also goes down. Because that one truck load can, deliver more and use more, therefore costs reduce. Obviously, there is also technology part of that in there, how you actually deliver, there's improvement on that. But without the scale, it's difficult to improve the technology, improve that, cost per unit without the scale. So I think, hopefully that help provide a little bit, because we see what's happening in Europe, what's happening in North America, what's happening in China. Cummins are globally. We see all those markets. So clearly see the difference in that.
Yeah, thank you for that. Robin, you've been for many years in the energy sector here, so I think a good question for you would be to guide us maybe through the plans for the country and where the low emission hydrogen could eventually come from. So might it be produced here by solar, wind, nuclear, whatever? So could you shed a bit of light on this, please?
Yes, so the MENA region in general, and the GCC and the UAE in particular, obviously some very major advantages in the production of low carbon hydrogen, and that applies very much to supply for the transport sector as well. So You have, obviously, on the blue side, you have production of hydrogen from natural gas with carbon capture and storage. The UAE, in fact, ADNOC recently shipped its first certified cargo of low-carbon ammonia made from hydrogen to Japan. So that is already an established value chain and existing basically with current technology. And okay, scale will come and costs will come down, but I mean, basically that is something that already exists today. On the green hydrogen side, of course, we've talked a bit about the Beeah project, and though that was at a small scale, that proves the concept, and then there are, of course, plans for much larger projects, primarily based on solar power. And as we know, this region, and again, the UAE in particular, has pretty close to the world's lowest delivered cost of solar power, and therefore extremely competitive green hydrogen production costs. I mean, the UAE, of course, it won't be so much driven by the combination of solar and wind. If you look at NEOM in Saudi Arabia, if you look at the projects in Egypt or Oman, they have a combination of solar and wind. There are some advantages to that in terms of higher load factors. There are some maybe disadvantages. It's a bit more complicated, and the cost of the wind is generally somewhat higher. But overall, I mean, there are a number of concepts for green hydrogen, and this region is very competitive in those. And what we've seen in our work, I think, look, and this would be a general view, blue hydrogen cheaper today. There is maybe some room for cost reduction, but the really major room for cost reduction is on the green side, which is still quite expensive today, but where costs could come down a lot with increased scale and improvements of electrolyzers and so on. Now, I think, when we talk about transport, you then have the key the issue of distribution. And I think we've just talked about kind of road-based transport. That's really key for me when we think about hydrogen production in the UAE. So hydrogen production in the UAE may be in various points, but it may be at Kazad, for example, the Abu Dhabi port and industrial zone. There's land there dedicated for hydrogen production and solar production and so on. That's a major port area that will have it has a rail connection. It has various kind of transport links, and it seems to me this is really the opportunity to play on here, is cut out a lot of those transport and distribution costs by having users of hydrogen who are very close to the point of production and who are kind of doing major point-to-point routes. So long-distance trucking, rail, marine uses, so where you're able to leverage those economies of scale and not have all the trouble of trying to transport small amounts of hydrogen around from station to station. This, I think, is really the big niche, is finding those long-distance transport and industrial users. You can think of other major industries. You can think of mining, for example, not so much in the UAE, perhaps, but you can think of mining in Saudi Arabia and Oman, for example. So these are really opportunities where we can not only get a low production cost, but we can also try to get a low delivered cost of hydrogen, as Nasir points out, is so important.
Yeah, thank you for that. Well, cost always becomes relative when we talk about the two main topics which still need some work here. Number one is obviously the complete phase out of fossil fuel subsidies. I cannot stress this enough because it is quite strange that a country has a net zero target 2050 and still subsidizes the waste of fossil fuels. And more important is probably a move which we've seen in Europe over the last 2 decades now was the price for CO2, which obviously dramatically changes the picture, and this is much more effective than any sort of subsidy. So in this sense, once the first country in the region introduced a price for CO2, even just a symbolic one, I think this will dramatically change the picture. But let's maybe talk a bit about different market segments. So we've talked about passenger vehicles. Well, the Emirates has the first train now. Well, there's a train under construction connecting Abu Dhabi and Sohar in Oman. Dubai Abu Dhabi is already running. Passenger train are in trials. Maybe Arvind, you're a mobility expert. So how do you see the potential for hydrogen adoption in different sectors, apart from passenger vehicles? Let's maybe talk about trucks, let's maybe talk about buses, trains, maybe even about ships and other mobility.
Yeah, absolutely. So if we look at the road transportation first, right? So even excluding rail, in terms of passenger car segments, which are, let's say, your typical SUVs, the cars and everything, the race between battery electric versus fuel cell is almost over. In the sense, battery electric has won in that particular space. Because with the current technology, with the battery capacities, with the range possibilities in cars, that use case is being fully, let's say, addressed by battery electric. And for someone to come in and now redevelop or, let's say, again implement a fuel cell is less likely because it costs money to develop any of these technologies. So that way, battery electric is in the lead, and it's expected to be that way for at least the foreseeable future, unless, let's say, suddenly lithium or nickel is not available in the world. What that leaves us from a hydrogen perspective is that for larger vehicles, like commercial vehicles, for medium and heavy duty and so on, where the duty cycles are a bit different, right? Because a car, you drive for an hour, you drive for 2 hours in a day, you go back home or to the office, you can plug it for charging. It has around 20 hours of, let's say, charging time which is possible in a day itself. So what that means is you don't need any specific public charging infrastructure beyond your home and the office related aspect. With that, you should be able to kind of address most of your, let's say, duty cycles. On commercial perspective, that's where the math changes a bit, where if you take a truck or, let's say, any of the cargo related applications and so on, and including some of the passenger vehicles, it is difficult for them to be in a particular place for a few hours together. And that's where the fast charging infrastructure, all of these particular things are required. Now, if we expand that argument to more of trucks, which requires megawatt level charging and so on, that is where automatically the hydrogen still has a bit of a competition with respect to battery electric vehicles. So for hydrogen, we do see, again, both from a fuel cell perspective and from a liquid hydrogen combustion perspective, we do see quite a bit of, let's say, technology which is being developed. Daimler, I mean, like, is well underway with respect to pilots and so on. And you do have many of the European manufacturers and the Chinese manufacturers well entrenched in the hydrogen ecosystem. So that is one place where we will see quite a bit of, let's say, traction and quite a bit of market developing happening on that particular front. When it comes to, let's say, marine-related aspects, again, similar things in terms of duty cycles and so on, but the key aspect, or let's say the limitation when it comes to the hydrogen aspect is the storage of hydrogen within those particular vehicles and for how long. So expanding that to aviation, similar things in terms of weight versus, let's say, the range-related things. So as long as those parameters are being addressed in terms of the safety of hydrogen carrying capacity, and in terms of, let's say, the weight which is imposed because of this carrying related front, then hydrogen still might have a chance in those particular things. But what we do see is more than batteries for some of the heavy commercial or heavy usage applications, it's hydrogen which is currently in the lead and kind of pushing forward.
Yeah, thanks. I wanted to add on top of some of the things you talked about. I think, it's quite clear, as Arvind mentioned, that from passenger vehicle perspective, electrical, hydrogen, I think that picture is quite clear. I want to add to the commercial vehicle, the actual usage perspective. Cummins has been in commercial vehicle for a long time, right? So some of the really important practical things I had to think about for commercial vehicle is, just think as a business owner, if I hire a driver whose job is to deliver 8 hours a day for whatever they need to do, I cannot have that individual person sit around for 2 hours or 30 minutes. Half of the people were sitting there 30 minutes not doing anything. That's not possible. Even if you say, okay, granted, let's do that. Imagine, because all the vehicles come inside to your depot, Imagine all the vehicle, half of the vehicle has to be charged simultaneously. How would that infrastructure actually work? Right? It's a very, very difficult situation. So it's not just simply saying individual thing. When you talk about commercial operations, you're talking about much, much different infrastructure build out and use case and technology requirements are quite different. So from that perspective, the current user experience is probably much more important in thinking about how you deploy that. Therefore, I still think there is a strong case for hydrogen. Yeah. Now, sure, it's not fully solved yet, right? The issue we're talking about, how much hydrogen you can actually put in a vehicle space, it's an issue, right? Today, hydrogen is a very, let's say, volume or weight density efficient, but very, very poor volumetric efficiency. And in the vehicle, that's one of the constraints. So how we solve that? It is still a challenge to solve, but surely I think there's, hydrogen have its important role to play in the commercial vehicle. It's actually demonstrated in many applications, especially like in China. We have actually deployed a lot of applications in China, and also in US with many fixed route type of applications. And there are some other applications also think about. For example, I want to mention this as sort of an experiment or pilot project that Cummins have done together with, in US, Department of Energy, Homeland Security, and Science Agency together, done this vehicle called H2 Rescue. You can go Google up the H2 Rescue. It is a pilot truck that's designed with a fuel cell for emergency response. You carry hydrogen enough to serve not only you can as a transportation, but also on site to provide electricity as a mobile office, as well as be able to reuse the water for the water usage. So it's quite interesting. Go take a look at it. Take a look at that video. It's very interesting use case. With the hydrogen, you can actually serve all the things that in that one vehicle. So take a look at it.
Yeah, thank you for that, Alan. And well, there is an interesting agreement which has been concluded in February between Mazda from Abu Dhabi and Daimler Truck, our associate partner from Germany. I think that's quite an interesting one because Daimler Truck is one of the largest manufacturers globally. Daimler Truck is focusing, apart from electric applications, quite heavily on hydrogen and has a slight bias on liquid hydrogen. So I think this agreement with Mazda is a pretty prominent one. So this is why I would like to mention it. Who would like to comment? Maybe Arvind, how do you see this agreement? It was big in the news here on the national and others.
Yes, and I think these kind of trends of these alliances are particularly important in driving some of the cases that we have here. There's quite a lot of hydrogen efforts globally, I would say, and Alan's spoken about some of them in China, which is certainly a great place to learn from, and we have the experiences in Europe as well, Germany, hydrogen trains and so on. And I think alliances like this are particularly important, and finding out some of the practicalities of how these systems actually work. And I think I like Alan's point particularly on this is thinking about this operationally. Running an industrial operation or a commercial operation is obviously a very different kind of a system from running a personal vehicle. And running these things as a system and thinking about, okay, maybe my hydrogen cost is a bit more than electricity if I were running electric vehicles, but practically for 24-hour operation, the hydrogen system turns out in terms of its practicality to be much better. And I think that's where learning from these kind of alliances is particularly important, and seeing what has been done elsewhere and how practically you manage these things. And that's why, again, I draw attention to sites like mining sites. I think we have some very interesting examples of Australia, which are worth looking at, where mining sites are, particularly remote mining sites, saying let's use hydrogen because we can make it on site. We don't have to truck in diesel over hundreds of kilometers, and we can decarbonize at the same time. And it's more practical for our operations than electrics, where we'd have to have our big mining trucks sitting around for hours charging every day. And port operations is another great example, where you have 24-hour operations and you can't afford to have vehicles and ships lying idle for recharging. So yes, I think these kind of alliances and learning from experience elsewhere is extremely important for an emerging sector like this one.
And just, I'd like to add another point here. See, this is the type of collaboration, just going back to the Daimler case with Mazda. This is the type of collaboration you have between, manufacturers, government entities, to try to push a new form of transportation. So, in a similar case, we are currently developing a waste-to-hydrogen facility. Our pilot plant has been inaugurated in Nottingham. We call it a super green hydrogen facility because it's a carbon negative process. And the pilot started in October, just before COP28. It's producing hydrogen out of mixed or municipal solid waste. We've seen the opportunities, and this is something to add on when it comes to the commercial side of transportation. Having depots, putting a lot of impact on the grid, especially when it comes to megawatt charging system. I don't think having let's say a fleet of vehicles, electric vehicles, using the local grid cannot handle that much. And this is why, the trends towards, hydrogen vehicles is actually ramping up. And we've seen this opportunity. And, we're developing right now the waste-to-hydrogen facility, which will produce phase 1, 6 tons of hydrogen on a daily basis. Up to it's a modular plant that will produce in phase 3 around 38 tons of hydrogen, which is, I think is enough for the market, just to lead the market. And then we looked at many cases, transportation, energy storage, also the conversion of ammonia to be used in the shipping industry as well.
Yeah, thank you for mentioning this, Nasir. I think you made a very important point, because you always need to look at an energy system.
Yep.
So you mentioned the load on the grid. It is the power system, but it also the specific application. So I think in this sense, it's not black or white, electric vehicle or electric mobility versus hydrogen. I think this is super important to understand, and you also cannot just compare efficiencies in an isolated way. For example, in Germany, in the north, there is billions of euros worth of wind power curtailed every year. Imagine just converting this to hydrogen, basically for free. These kind of things, the storage element, the long-term storage of hydrogen, I think is important. Molecule, you could effectively bridge seasons. Here you have a very high demand in summer. In Europe, it's opposite for heating in winter, but you can store hydrogen easily, terawatt hours underground, for example, like you do with methane today. All these kind of things, and I'm glad also that Beeah is very innovative on yellow hydrogen converting waste by thermolysis. I think that's a very important project as well. So, Ellen, you wanted to add a last thing?
Yeah, I was wanted to add a little bit. You really comment on how different use cases and really changes the solution. And you even talk about hydrogen generation now. from the actual technology perspective, this is where I say Cummins is on the mission to really help customers in their use case, really develop solutions for that, which we really advocate that solutions cannot be one size fits all. Really need to look at individual use case and drive a solution for that. So we have this multi-path and really look at individual cases and to drive a solution. And so that, I think, it's important, especially when we look at the commercial applications and all of those. The actual use case is really, really important to drive the solution that you feel, or we can all feel good about, and to deliver what we need to. So I think that is the message I think I want to add. That.
Yeah, that's an important message. Thank you for that. We have maybe time for one question. So let's bring in the audience. Is there anybody who would like to address a question to the panel? Well, I
think we did a good job explaining.
Yeah, well, and maybe just a brief closing statement, 20 seconds for everybody.
Okay, we have a future that we can all work together. This is an ecosystem play, so together we'll make it happen.
We see, maybe this is something Arvind mentioned earlier, I think hydrogen is the future. We don't want to end up tampering a lot with Mother Earth.
Yes, and we're going to have a lot of hydrogen available in this region for industry and other uses. This is a great opportunity to make use of it. We don't have the problem that you have in other parts of the region, other parts of the world where you want to do hydrogen transport, but there's no hydrogen. In a few years, we will have plenty of hydrogen here, and the challenge is how to make sensible use of it in the transport sector.
Sure. I think you stole half of my statement, but it's still okay. See, I think from a region perspective, the access to the renewable side of things, and with, let's say, even from a gray hydrogen perspective, the access to the petrochemicals and so on, that's very high in this region, right? So it's a given that there's going to be a lot of, let's say, traction in this particular region. It will serve as a nucleus for this particular economy development. At the same time, we also need to ensure that the alliances with some of the manufacturers, the technology developers and so on need to be in place. So I think that's where the two things need to be linked together. So that way, the future of this energy transition still is present in Middle East, or let's say we play a big role from here.
No, that's great. And let me maybe close with a positive note here. Who would have expected that today we are at 1 to 2 cent solar per kilowatt hour, 2 to 3 cent wind? Actually, 10 years ago, if you would have asked anybody, nobody would have thought this is even possible by 2050. So in this sense, we have massively overachieved. Or look at all the electric vehicles around. So I think in this sense, let's get to work, concrete action, no talk, and then with all the converging technologies, the tipping points now, I think in 10 years from now, we'll probably again be very positively surprised with the power of innovation and the amazing people here in the UAE and the region. So thank you very much in this sense for your attention, and for the panelists for the great thoughts and comments.
Thank you.
Thank you.